The White House Correspondents' Dinner was on Saturday. It's the annual gathering of the Washington, D.C. press and the White House administration. It's supposed to be a collegial event where they tell jokes and spend time in a non-adversarial manner. The problem is the relationship between the press and power has long since ceased to be adversarial. So now it's become a little bit of a joke, an indulgence, a fiddle while Rome burns, as power and the press all commingle, have a cocktail. Colin Jost, Saturday Night Live host, was the MC of the event. And while he did make some jokes at the expense of Joe Biden, he spent most of his time focused on someone who is no longer president, Donald Trump. And at the end of his jokes about Joe Biden, which included looking for the puppet strings of Barack Obama, he said that the reason that Joe Biden is president is because America has returned to decency. He talked about his grandfather. He said that his grandfather was decent. His grandfather on Staten Island was a firefighter, and his grandfather voted for Joe Biden. He said that it was returned to decency. Miranda Devine, in a column up at the New York Post, really had an awesome rebuttal. She said, is this what we're supposed to believe is decent? That we now have yet another piece of evidence in the influence peddling scheme of the Biden family and the halls of government power with foreign entities, from China to Ukraine, to the latest being that his brother Jim Biden has a profitable relationship with the state of Qatar. Is it decent to use your power to enrich yourself and your families? Is it decent to peddle influence? Is it decent to destroy the border, which leads to a drug crisis, which leads to the destruction of a culture, which leads to the destruction of jobs? Is it decent to pretend that we're not a nation state and we shouldn't have a protected southern border to the United States of America? Is it decent to invite trans activists onto the lawn of the White House to expose themselves bare-chested? Is it decent to film pornography, to oversee a regime and an administration where literal pornography is filmed, gay porn, in the hearing chambers room of the United States Senate? Is it decent to refuse to acknowledge your grandchild until a court-required paternity test says, yes, that child is Hunter's, and now you can safely say you have one more grandchild? Is it decent to deny Secret Service protection to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? Is all of this supposed to be decent because we no longer have mean tweets from Donald Trump? Is this the definition of decency? And when Joe Biden took his turn at the podium at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, he took that moment to talk to the press about that they needed to take this stand athwart history and stop disinformation. Of course, it's an ironic thing for him to say. It's an ironic position for him to hold. Because in the confluence of decency and disinformation, late last week, he appeared with Howard Stern, where he told yet another fictional entry into his biography. The latest for his resume: arrested during the civil rights movement. Watch.
And I looked at my mom. I said, honey, you haven't said anything. She said, Joey, let me remember. True story. She said, remember when they were desegregating Linfield, the neighborhood? There was, 70 homes built at one suburbia. And I told you, and there was a black family moving in, and there was people who were down there protesting. I told you not to go down there, and you went down. Remember that? And you got arrested, be standing on the porch with a black family.
Right.
And they brought you back, the police. And I said, yeah, Mom, I remember that.
This entire interview was disinformation. This entire interview was an embarrassment. It was yet another embarrassment to Joe Biden, but it was also an embarrassment to the man who describes himself as the king of all media. It was an absolute embarrassment for Howard Stern, who at one time was legitimately a rebel, who pushed the limits of the FCC, who changed radio, who could definitely have staked a claim to the greatest of all time at one time when it came to talk radio, at least outside the bounds of political talk, where, of course, who reigns supreme but Rush Limbaugh. But Howard Stern was legit, and Howard Stern was a rebel. Now Howard Stern is a hand sanitizing, toting germaphobe who doesn't leave his protective bubble and kisses up, sucks up to power. Howard Stern of the 1990s, Howard Stern of the 2000s would be absolutely embarrassed by the Howard Stern of today. He spent one of his greatest skills, by the way, interviewing. He spent all that time interviewing the President of the United States, which amounted to a G-rated description would be providing a back massage to Joe Biden. But it's also an embarrassment for Joe Biden, whose lies are now so obvious that he's basically become the Forrest Gump of politics. His biography is hard to keep up with, but I tried. His biography is hard to chart, but I've tried. His biography is hard to reconcile, but Pete Hegseth and I did this weekend on Off the Wall on Fox and Friends. And so I thought we would go ahead and catalog Joe Biden, the fictional resume, the Forrest Gump of American politics. Let's start with his ethnicity. Joe Biden is as best I can tell, Greek, once called Bideноpolis, raised in a Puerto Rican community. He always wanted to be Polish and has always had an affinity for the Polish community. Italian, but I think he admits that became by marriage. Raised in a Jewish synagogue, simultaneously brought up in the black church. Joe Biden is a man of many ethnicities, but the only truth, if we're playing spot the truth and not spot the lie, is he's an Irish Catholic. A Polish, Greek, black, Jewish, Italian, Puerto Rican Irish Catholic. His experience is even more fantastical. Here is the things Joe Biden has claimed to do in this one life. If my message when I began this show today was, we only get one trip, we only get one chance at this life, so take care of it and do everything you can. Boy, has Joe Biden done it all. He took those words to heart. He once, by claim, trekked 17,000 miles with Xi Jinping across the Himalayas. They racked up 17,000 miles of travel together, he and the premier of China. He was arrested during the civil rights movement from the front porch, as you just heard during that interview with Howard Stern. But it wasn't his only arrest in pursuit of racial justice. He was once arrested, according to his own telling, with our UN ambassador in South Africa, protesting for Nelson Mandela. No record, by the way, of either arrest. He once took the train, he said perhaps also a car, but took the train against the recently collapsed Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore. The trouble with that story is there were no train tracks ever on the Francis Scott Key Bridge. He holds a high school record, or actually he claims to be the runner-up in the high school scoring record for Delaware, but the truth of the matter is he got fifth in scoring in his conference within Delaware. He once said he was top half of his class in law school. Records show he graduated 76th out of 85 in law school. He once drove an 18-wheeler. No real record of when, how, or why he drove that 18-wheeler. He, of course, fought corn pop while saving countless lives as a lifeguard when he was a child. Corn pop. Bad dude. And his uncle, whose plane crashed during World War II, legitimately, he claims to have been eaten by cannibals in Papua New Guinea. It's incredible, and it's probably only scratching the surface. The number of claims he has made in this life, certainly ringing it all out. The most interesting man in the world, the Forrest Gump of American politics, the fantastical disinformation, the life told by the toady to power Howard Stern, by the man of the highest power in the United States of America, Joe Biden, the return of decency.